Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a genuinely fascinating intersection of disciplines. We're looking at exactly how modern scientists are teaming up with ancient indigenous knowledge and throwing in some cutting-edge computer simulations to unlock the mysteries of early human ocean voyages. We're going to see how the actual day-to-day practice of voyaging is every bit as complex as the wild physical environments our ancestors traveled through. To understand how researchers are reverse engineering these incredible ancient crossings, here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover the science of seafaring, why they went to sea, building the vessel, preparing for the journey, navigating the open ocean, and finally, merging tradition with technology. All right, part 1, the science of seafaring, moving beyond the blank map. For the longest time, computer models just treated the ocean like this massive, empty void. It was literally viewed as a blank barrier to connection, totally devoid of human life or social activity. But to really understand these voyages, we have to flip the script. We need to shift our perspective and view the ocean as a meritory. Think of a meritory as a highly dynamic seascape. It's full of life, social action, and deep cultural meaning. It isn't just some water you have to cross to get from point A to point B. It's a connected space packed with human agency. It's a territory all its own. Moving on to part 2, why go to sea? The motivations behind the voyage. So we have to ask the big question, why did early humans go to sea in the first place? Well, as you can probably guess, it's never a simple choice. Heading out into the open ocean means you have to weigh communal needs and social goals against some incredibly harsh practical realities and very strict technological limits. For some groups, it might have actually been a forced migration, a scenario where they had absolutely no other choice but to brave the water. It really all boils down to a massive, complex tug-of-war of push and pull factors. On the push side, you have basic survival. We're talking forced migrations caused by climate disasters, population pressure, and rapidly shrinking resources. But then, on the pull side, there's the undeniable draw of discovery. Things like finding unique island resources, earning serious social prestige within a ranked community, or, honestly, just the pure thrill of adventure and exploration. When you look at the timeline of oceanic exploration, the scale is just staggering. We can trace the origins of seafaring back across deep time, starting around 50,000 to 65,000 years ago during the Pleistocene. That's when the earliest rafts crossed from the Sunda Shelf, what we now call island Southeast Asia, over to Sahul, which was the connected landmass of ancient Australia and New Guinea. By 20,000 years ago, mariners had pushed all the way to the eastern edge of the Solomon Islands, and then, roughly 3,500 years ago, Austronesian seafarers developed the sophisticated watercraft and navigation techniques that kicked off deep ocean voyaging throughout all of Oceania. And for the descendant communities today, this isn't just ancient history. The sea is quite literally an intrinsic part of their identity. It is deeply embedded in their language and their origin stories. The Tongan anthropologist Apeli Hawofa captured this perfectly when he wrote, "The ocean is in us." I just love that. It beautifully reframes the sea not as a wall that separates people, but as the very thing that connects them. Okay, part 3, building the vessel, blending archaeology and practice. So we know why they went, but how did they physically get there? By studying the reconstruction of the Caribbean canoa, which is a traditional dugout canoe, we get to see experimental archaeology in action. This is so cool. First, researchers analyzed historical accounts. Then, they teamed up with modern colonial marine carpenters down in French Guiana to physically build the canoe. They took all that real-world physical data, created 3D digital models to run tests, and finally, launched the actual canoe on inter-island sea trials. This breakdown really hits the nail on the head. It shows exactly why we absolutely need both computer data and real-world sea trials. Computational 3D models are fantastic for testing hypotheses, analyzing hydrostatics, and finding the extreme physical limits of a hull. But at the end of the day, a digital twin is really just a floating hypothesis until it's tested by human hands. Real-world expeditions validate that computer data against actual human experience, stuff you can't easily code, like physical fatigue or reacting to totally unpredictable coastal conditions. Next up, part 4, preparing for the journey, navigational knowledge. Before scientists could even hope to program accurate computer models, they had to crack the code of traditional Pacific wayfinding. And let me tell you, it is an absolute masterclass in sensory and mental processing. It happens in 3 main stages. First, navigators set their course using star compasses and celestial bodies. Second, once they're out of sight of land, they estimate their position using dead reckoning and this brilliant mental concept of a moving reference island. And third, they home in on the target island, sometimes from up to 50 miles away, just by reading disrupted swell patterns, cloud formations, and the flight paths of birds. But how did they pass this incredible embodied knowledge down through the generations? Through something absolutely brilliant: stick charts. Marshallese navigators historically created these physical models using cowrie shells and pieces of wood. Now, these were not just your standard treasure maps. They were highly complex educational tools. They were used to teach apprentices exactly how islands disrupt ocean swells through reflection, refraction, and diffraction. It is quite literally an indigenous precursor to modern oceanographic modeling. How amazing is that? All right, part 5, navigating the open ocean, the human experience. Now we hit the open water, and here is the stark reality check for modern modelers. Look at this contrast. A computer measures a voyage as a cold, rigid equation: algorithmic hours, distance, and wind currents. But a human navigator? They view a voyage as a deeply sensory experience. They're reacting in real time to star positions, feeling the wave disruptions right through the hull of the canoe, relying heavily on their mental maps, and constantly pushing through their own physical and emotional limits. So to make these simulations actually work, modelers have to figure out how to account for these highly variable, almost invisible human stressors. Think about it. A crew's entire perception of time completely changes when they're out at sea. You have to factor in crippling physical fatigue, restricted caloric intake, very real emotional responses to danger, and even the deliberate avoidance of culturally restricted waters. These are cultural and physical choices that dramatically impact real-world decision-making in ways that a simple algorithm would completely miss. Which brings us to our final stop, part 6, merging tradition with technology, the return. This is where it all comes together beautifully. By sharing their simulation results with traditional cultural practitioners, researchers create a vital feedback loop. They are essentially opening up the black box of the algorithm and inviting human correction. They compare the choices made by the computer program with the choices that an actual, experienced practitioner would make out there in the real world. This ensures that the digital models don't just calculate what's mathematically possible, but what was actually humanly probable. So, why does all of this matter today? Well, understanding these ancient seafaring practices is about so much more than just preserving heritage, though for sure that is incredibly important. By combining ancient indigenous knowledge with modern computing, we learn how resilient human beings adapt to extreme environments. As climate change continues to reshape our modern coastlines and force new global migrations, what can the computer models of ancient seafarers teach us about our own future survival? Think about that as you navigate your own week. I hope this explainer gave you a whole new perspective on our deep time maritime history.